Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the opening paragraph of his most famous book, The Art of the Deal, Donald Trump writes that deals are my art form. Other people paint beautifully on canvas or write wonderful poetry. I like making deals. The president says that his latest work, entitled Ukraine, hasn't quite come together yet. But I've no doubt that if asked, he would describe his plan as the geopolitical equivalent of the Mona Lisa. Anxious critics, including Europe's leaders, worry that what's coming out of the White House is actually a work of Pollock's. That's the great artist Jackson Pollock, of course. But as Mr. Trump points out in his book, while to some the Americans' canvases may look like someone just flung a pot of paint at the wall, his picture, number 17A, did sell for $200 million in 2016. Mr. Zelensky says he'll wait to see the completed work, though he fears that Ukraine may be forced to choose between its allies and its dignity. Mr. Putin seems to like it already, but he'll no doubt have some suggestions for improvement. He always does. So perhaps there's a way to go on this one. All the same, wishful thinking perhaps, but could this be the beginning of the end to this dreadful war? Right now, to Zelensky, it probably looks less like a deal and more like a surrender. And if there is a work of art that truly captures what is taking place in Ukraine right now, it is probably Picasso's horrific picture of slaughter of the innocents by fascists in the Spanish Civil War, Guernica. Let's start with the government this morning. A few moments ago, I spoke to the Transport Secretary. Heidi Alexander, when you discussed the proposed Ukraine peace deal at the Cabinet last week, what was the prevailing view?
So, Trevor, like many of your viewers, I learnt about the peace deal yesterday that President Trump was putting forward. I know that the Prime Minister spoke to President Trump yesterday, as well as President Zelensky. Clearly, it's been a harrowing conflict, and we need to find a way to secure that ceasefire and open up space for meaningful negotiations. There's clearly important meetings that are happening today in Geneva with the National Security Advisors. Jonathan Pell will be there for the UK with the US counterparts and National Security Advisors from other European countries as well as from Ukraine. And our fundamental view on this is the future of Ukraine has to be determined by Ukrainians themselves. But we do need to find a way to bring this conflict to an end and to secure that just and lasting peace that everyone wants.
I'll come to the substance of it in a moment, but OK, I can understand that maybe the Cabinet didn't know, but presumably the Prime Minister was warned this was coming.
So the Prime Minister has a very close relationship with President Zelensky and works closely with Donald Trump on this, because the only way that we're going to actually get a resolution to this conflict is by international powers working together to put pressure on Russia. There's been one side in this conflict, Trevor, that could... There's one side in this conflict.
That's not quite the same thing as saying he was consulted before.
There's one side in this conflict, Trevor, that could bring an end to the harrowing images that we're seeing on our television screens, and that's Russia. And their actions haven't lived up to their words on this, because they've been firing drones, precision-guided missiles into Ukraine over recent weeks. That's killing and maiming innocent children and the elderly.
Look, I understand all of that. But what we are concerned about, principally, is what is our role here? We're expected to play a part as a country. And I suppose what I'm really wondering here is, though we claim to be the Americans' closest allies, they didn't consult us, did they?
So the role of the United Kingdom and the work that the Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been doing has been in putting that coalition of the willing together. That's why you saw
him... That's an answer to a different question.
That's why you saw him at the G20
us?
summit, talking with President Macron, talking with Chancellor Merz from Germany.
President Trump wasn't at the G20 summit.
It's really important that the coalition of the willing are working with President Trump.
Did he consult us?
We have been clear that there are elements of the peace plan that he has proposed that are essential for a just and lasting peace. It does require some additional work. I don't want to preempt the conversations that will be happening in Geneva today amongst the national security advisors with Ukraine there. But, we do need to try and seize this moment in order to take some steps that get us closer to securing that ceasefire and to be delivering that just and lasting
I'm
peace.
hearing the intention here, but it's pretty pointless, isn't it? If the Americans don't think we're important enough to consult before they launch this on the world, what is the point of going to Washington? What is the point of going to Geneva? Because our voice doesn't count with them, does it?
I think it does count with them. And actually, if you listen to some of the comments of Marco Rubio when he was talking about the role that Jonathan Powell played in discussions about securing a ceasefire in Gaza in the Middle East, he spoke very highly and very positively of the role that the UK played in that. And so I think our relationship with the US is one of seeking to influence, to facilitate that dialogue with other global leaders, which is exactly what the Prime Minister was doing when he was in Johannesburg at the G20 yesterday. And as I say, there are going to be those really critical discussions in Geneva.
When Jonathan Powell goes to Geneva, is he going to be saying to Mr Rubio and the others, we don't like this plan?
What he's going to be saying is that we believe that there are elements of that 28-point plan that are essential for a lasting peace, but there is some more additional work that is required on it.
On what elements?
So I think you would have heard
what have we got doubts
you would have
about?
heard the Prime Minister yesterday, talking about the need for Ukraine to have their own capacity to defend themselves in terms of whether there are any caps on the size of the military and the defence forces in Ukraine. I think that's something that the Prime Minister has said that, Ukraine needs to be in a position, if we get to a ceasefire, where they can protect their civilians and secure the peace for the long term.
It's quite a curious objection, because actually, as I understand it, the number in the plan is 600,000, which is more than Ukrainian troops, which is more than the number they had before the war. But let's just deal with the broad prospects here. If the Ukrainians say they aren't going to play ball with this, the Americans say, OK, well, fine, we'll wash our hands. Do you think Europe can step in? Do we have the capacity to fill in for American military hardware and intelligence?
I think what we have seen is that Donald Trump, the President of the United States, alongside European leaders, believes that there can be a path to peace. On that, we are united. We are planning for what our role might be in the event that we can secure that ceasefire and there is a peace agreement. It's, one of the elements of that 28-point plan is about the security, backup, if you like, the security guarantee that America would play. And so this has got to be an effort that is an international effort led by Ukraine about what is right for their country and their country's future.
The Americans would say, yeah, that's good, let's hope for the best. But let's also plan for the worst. So let me ask you again, if we were to plan for a situation in which the Americans say, as Mr Trump said on Friday, if we can't make this work, you can't depend on America to continue doing this. Will the Europeans want to and be able to step in to fill in for what the Americans don't provide in the way of hardware and intelligence?
Trevor, we are working to secure that ceasefire and deliver a just and lasting peace. I'm not going to get ahead of those really critical discussions that are taking place in Geneva this afternoon.
OK, let's talk about your own portfolio. You're going to freeze rail fares, which is good news for those who go to work by rail, I think 10% of journeys. Presumably, given that 66% of us get to work by car, can we expect the Chancellor to freeze fuel duty for the 15th year in succession?
So to answer the first part of your question, where you refer to the announcement that we're making today about rail, I do think it's just worth highlighting that this will be the first time in 30 years that rail fares are frozen. And the Chancellor are acutely aware of how important affordability is to the travelling public. And so that's why when it comes to the rail network, we are stepping in to ensure that hard-working commuters, hard-working families can keep more of their hard-earned cash. If you look at what has happened to rail fares over the last decade and a half, they have increased by 60% between 2010 and 2024 under the Conservatives. We don't believe that is right if you want to attract more people to use the railways. So in this year, when we are setting up Great British Railways as well, which is going to bring the train operating companies into public ownership, stop the leakage of public money to the private shareholders, we think it's right to make life a little bit easier for people that are still dealing with cost of living pressures.
I'm very happy for you to explain to the 1 in 10, those who take that 1 in 10 journeys, what you're doing for them. I still haven't heard an answer to what the 2 out of 3 people who drive to work are going to get out of this.
So, Trevor, you talk about the number of people that go to work using the train. This fares freeze is going to...
You're going back to rail. I'm asking you about car drivers.
I think it's also important to say that the rail fares freeze is going to apply to over 1 billion journeys next year, and the savings that people can make on that are very significant. The other point I was also going to make is...
I'm not even asking you about the billions who go on buses. I'm asking you about the many more who drive to work. What are they getting out of the budget?
No. The other point I wanted to make about the rail fares freeze is that when I was at Swindon Station yesterday afternoon, it was like being in an underground tube station. There were so many people who use the rail network for leisure purposes. That's a trend that we have seen post the pandemic. In terms of people who make their journeys to work...
Forgive me, you have explained quite fully why rail users are going to benefit.
Trevor, as the Transport Secretary.
But let me ask you for the third time. Can car users, which is 2/3 of all journeys to work, expect the fuel duty to be frozen again?
So you would not expect me to speculate on what is going to be contained in the budget on Wednesday. I understand that...
You can tell me a lot about rail fares.
I understand that the Chancellor is going to be in your studio next week, and you can put that question to her then. You will know that all matters in relation to taxation in particular are linked to fiscal
Apart from
events.
rail fares.
Rail fares aren't a matter of taxation. And so, when it comes to tax and duties, I'm going to have to suggest that you put those questions to the Chancellor next week.
All right. Look, the other big issue, which appears to be on the horizon, is that the Chancellor is, it seems, going to say that the 2-child cap will be lifted. Now, I'm not going to ask you to confirm or deny that, but would you welcome the lifting of the 2-child cap if it's combined with some kind of welfare reform?
So you're right, I'm not going to speculate on what is going to be in the budget on Wednesday. What I would say is that tackling child poverty is in the DNA of the Labour Party. Nobody wants to see kids going without, and we know that 3/4 of children who are living in poverty at the moment are in working households, and growing up in poverty has consequences that last a lifetime. You're less likely to do well at school, and you're more likely, when you're a young adult, not to be in education, employment or training. So Bridget Phillips, the Education Secretary, has been doing some really important work through the Child Poverty Task Force.
She told us about that.
Looking at what levers can be pulled across the piece to tackle child poverty. We're not waiting around, though. That's why we've actually introduced free breakfast clubs in schools. We've expanded free childcare. We've also changed the eligibility, widened the eligibility for free school meals. So, look, I'm confident, Trevor, that we are going to be taking decisions in this Parliament, which means that at the end of this 5-year term, we will have more children who are...
I get that, and I take that as you would like to do this. But let me ask you a serious question. If the Chancellor does lift the two-child benefit cap now or in the near future, tell me how you explain that to Labour voters who have chosen not to have more than 2 children because they know they can't afford it, but then find themselves having to hand their taxes over to people who feel entitled to have a third choice because the state will back them. And you will know that the cap is actually popular. In fact, we looked up the data. 60% pretty much of all voters support it, and a majority of Labour voters support its retention.
So I think that people will understand that for the 3/4 of children who are living in households where mum and dad are in work but the child is in poverty...
They know that, but they still
that child
think...
has not
They
done
still
anything
think the
to
two-child
deserve
cap
less
is the best
chances
way
in life. And this government,
to recognise
this government is about giving opportunity to all. It shouldn't matter what the size of your parents' bank balance is in terms of your chances in life. And that's why I say tackling child poverty
but if I may
is
say
in
so,
the DNA
it's a serious
of the Labour
point.
Party.
Voters still think this is right, morally right, that those who have made a choice not to have more than 2 children shouldn't have to pay for those who make a different choice.
And that is why we are also determined to make sure that our welfare system is fair. You've heard Pat McFadden, the new Work and Pensions Secretary, talking about the need to make sure that we get young people into work. We've got 1 in 8 young people who are not in employment, education or training. So we do need to continue...
So there will be another bash at welfare reform?
Well, we've always said that actually it's so much better for people to be in work and to be given the dignity of work and have the opportunities that work gives them. And so, you know, Pat is working very, very, you know, hard on how we get to that system which can make sure that everyone has opportunity in life.
Heidi Alexander, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Trevor.